You're nothing but a freeloader. My own daughter screamed at me across the Christmas dinner table in the very house she lived in at my expense. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Her husband, Michael, just nodded, his cold expression a silent endorsement of her betrayal. The guests froze, their faces masks of shock, as I calmly replied, "You have until morning to pack your things and leave." The very next day, the police knocked on my front door. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound muffled by the festive warmth of the house. Before I could even begin to unwind my scarf, Danielle's voice sliced through the gentle glow of the Christmas lights. "Finally decided to show up, did you? I was starting to think you got lost in your precious book stacks again." She was sprawled across my favorite leather recliner as if it were a throne she had inherited. The multicolored lights of the Christmas tree danced across her phone screen as her thumb moved in an endless, hypnotic scroll. She didn't bother to look up. This had been my reality for 8 long months. 8 months of walking into my own home only to find my space, my chair, my quiet refuge, claimed by her. I hung my coat with deliberate care in the hall closet, listening to the soft patter of melting snow dripping from the hem onto the polished hardwood floor. My volunteer shift at the community library had run later than usual. Mr. Henderson had needed an extra pair of hands with the mountain of holiday returns. But I'd still hurried, braving the biting December wind to get home for our Christmas Eve. "Good evening," I said, stepping into the living room and smoothing the front of my sweater. "How are the preparations for tomorrow's dinner coming along?" Michael emerged from the kitchen archway, a dish towel slung over his shoulder, his back pointedly turned toward me. His dark hair was styled in a trendy, sharp cut that made him look younger than 32. More like the ambitious college student Danielle had married years ago, not the man who had been living under my roof since early April. "We'll manage tomorrow on our own." Danielle's tone was sharp, carrying that familiar, grating edge of dismissal. "We don't need you getting in the way." The fireplace crackled softly in the background, its flames casting playful shadows across the room. I had arranged every single Christmas decoration myself 3 weeks prior. The fragrant garland draped along the mantel, the ceramic nativity set my late husband Robert had collected piece by piece over the years. The stockings were all hung with precision and care. Everything was in its proper place. Everything except the fractured family living beneath them. "Everything is under control," Michael added, his voice as flat and cold as the winter pavement outside. He still hadn't turned around. I moved instinctively toward the fireplace, my hand reaching out to straighten a slightly askew ornament on the tree. The little silver bell chimed softly at my touch. Control. What an interesting choice of words. I couldn't help but wonder whose control he was referring to. "The Thompsons are really excited for tomorrow," Danielle continued, her eyes finally lifting from her phone. "Olivia's bringing her famous potato salad." The words felt like a splash of ice water. "The Thompsons? For tomorrow?" I wasn't aware we were having other guests. Danielle's eyebrows arched in a performance of mock surprise. "Oh, did we not mention that?" "Yeah. Mark and Olivia are coming over. And Karen from next door. Brian from my old office too." She waved a dismissive hand. "It's just a few people." My fingers tightened around the delicate glass ornament. Just a few people. In my house. Seated at my table. Using my dishes, drinking my wine, and eating a feast that would be paid for with my pension money. "And when exactly was this decided? Sometime last week?" Danielle shrugged, her attention already drifting back to the glowing screen in her hand. "Michael sent out the invites. You were probably at the library." "Of course, I was at the library. I volunteered there every Tuesday and Thursday, a routine I'd kept for 3 years since my retirement. They knew my schedule perfectly. They had intentionally planned this around my absence. The Christmas tree lights began to blur as I stared at them. Red, green, and gold colors that were supposed to signify warmth, joy, and celebration. Instead, They felt like decorations in a stranger's house, props in someone else's life. How many people exactly? 6, maybe 7? Michael finally answered, his back still resolutely turned. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy, except for the artisanal cheeses and gourmet groceries I'd noticed appearing in my refrigerator all week. The expensive bottles of wine lining the kitchen counter. The premium free-range turkey that had cost at least twice what I would normally spend. Danielle stretched languidly in my recliner, propping her feet up on the antique coffee table I had painstakingly refinished myself last spring. The same coffee table that was now marred with white water rings from the countless glasses she never bothered to place on a coaster. Don't you worry, old woman. We've got it all handled. Old woman. The phrase settled in my chest like a cold, heavy stone. 65 wasn't ancient. Retired certainly didn't mean useless. This was still my house, my home, my life, wasn't it? I reached out and adjusted another ornament. This one, a small wooden angel Robert had painted himself decades ago. The delicate, careful brush strokes were a poignant reminder of his gentle hands, of his quiet way of making everything around him beautiful. He would have been so gracious about unexpected guests. He would have smiled, welcomed them with open arms, and somehow spun the situation into something magical. But Robert wasn't here. He hadn't been for 4 years, and I was not Robert. Well, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper, I suppose I should get out of your way then. Good idea, Danielle mumbled, her focus already completely lost in her phone again. We have some last-minute things to finish up. I stood there for another long moment, watching my daughter scroll through whatever digital world held her more captive than basic human courtesy. I watched my son-in-law move through my kitchen with an efficiency that suggested ownership. I listened to the fire crackle in the hearth, where I had spent countless quiet evenings reading, thinking, and remembering. The old stairs creaked under my weight as I began my ascent, each step taking me further away from the life that was unfolding in my living room, and closer to the quiet refuge of my bedroom. Behind me, I could hear Michael's voice, though the words were indistinct. Something about tablecloths and seating arrangements. My hand instinctively found the smooth, worn banister that Robert had polished every Saturday morning for 23 years. The bedroom door closed with a soft click, muffling the sounds from downstairs. I stood there for a moment, my hand still resting on the doorknob, listening to the muted preparations happening without me. Michael's footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. Danielle's voice rose for a moment, then faded away. I slipped off my shoes, placing them neatly beside the bed, and settled into the comfortable reading chair by the window. Snow had begun to fall again, each delicate flake caught for a brief, sparkling moment in the golden glow of the streetlight before vanishing into the darkness below. The miller's house across the street was a blaze of Christmas cheer, with multicolored lights outlining every window and doorframe. An inflatable snowman on their front lawn waved a friendly, mechanical greeting. My desk drawer slid open with the familiar scrape of wood on wood. Inside, tucked beneath retirement papers and old utility bills, lay the photo albums I so rarely touched anymore. Organizing them had been one of Robert's quiet joys. Everything was chronological, meticulously labeled, and perfectly preserved. The first album fell open to a picture from our wedding day. Robert stood in a crisp, dark suit, beaming despite the simple courthouse setting we'd chosen to stay within our budget. My younger self was beside him in a borrowed dress, both of us grinning as if we'd just won the lottery. In a way, we had. I turned the page. Danielle at 6 months old, all chubby cheeks and bright, curious eyes, reaching for the camera with her tiny, clenched fists. Robert had captured every single milestone, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. There was a photo of Danielle building blanket forts in this very room when she was 8. Danielle at her college graduation, her cap sitting slightly askew, diploma held high, pride radiating from every pore. The next photograph stopped me cold. It was Danielle at 25. The year she landed the assistant manager position at the department store. She had called me that night, her voice electric with excitement. "Mom, I did it. I'm finally getting somewhere." Where had that young woman gone? The one who had worked double shifts without complaint, who had saved for months to buy Michael his wedding band, who had talked so passionately about building a life of her own instead of borrowing one. 8 months ago, she had shown up on my doorstep with 2 large suitcases and a sob story about temporary setbacks. "Just for a couple of weeks, Mom," she'd pleaded. "Just until we can get back on our feet." The department store had laid her off in March due to budget cuts. Michael's hours at the architecture firm had been drastically reduced. They had maxed out their credit cards trying to keep up appearances, the hefty car payment on Danielle's SUV, the rent on their trendy apartment, dinners out 3 times a week because Michael claimed he was too exhausted from his job search to cook. I had said yes, of course. They were my family. You always help family. But help was meant to be a bridge, not a permanent destination. Downstairs, I heard the heavy thud of something being dropped, followed by Michael's voice, sharp with irritation. Danielle's response was muffled, but had that same dismissive tone she had used with me earlier, the same tone that had become her default over the past few months. I reached for the small, leather-bound notebook I kept in the drawer. Robert used to tease me about my lists, my calculations, my ingrained need to track everything. "You engineer the grocery shopping, Evelyn," he would laugh. But the numbers didn't lie. The utility bills were up 37% since April. My grocery costs had doubled. Water usage had tripled. Thanks to Michael's hour-long showers and Danielle's insistence on running the dishwasher every single day, whether it was full or not. Last week, I'd found a credit card bill Danielle had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. $250 at an electronics store. $300 at the mall, while I was carefully clipping coupons and buying generic brands to make my pension stretch. She was purchasing wireless headphones and designer jeans. The pages of my notebook were filled with calculations. 8 months of escalating expenses. 8 months of watching my retirement savings dwindle to support 2 healthy adults who seemed to have completely forgotten the meaning of responsibility. Robert's photographs smiled up at me from the album. He had always seen the best in Danielle, always defended her choices when I worried about her spending habits or her tendency to take the easy way out. "She's just finding her way, honey," he'd always said. Everyone finds their way differently. But this wasn't finding a way. This was deliberately taking the easiest path, the one paved with someone else's hard-earned sacrifices. A door slammed downstairs. Danielle's voice rose, not quite loud enough for me to make out the words. But the frustration in her tone was unmistakable. Michael's response was sharper this time. I gently closed the photo album and returned it to the drawer. The notebook went back as well, placed alongside the growing stack of evidence that my generosity had morphed into enablement, that my own daughter had mistaken my kindness for weakness. The bedroom suddenly felt smaller, cramped by the heavy weight of that realization. My sanctuary had become a retreat. My own home, a place where I was forced to hide from the very people who should have been grateful for my help. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The miller's mechanical snowman waved its cheerful, plastic greeting to no one in particular. All across the neighborhood, families were finishing their Christmas Eve preparations, gathering around their trees, sharing in the quiet anticipation of the morning to come. I was spending mine calculating the true cost of my own kindness. The house grew quieter as the evening wore on, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't peaceful or expectant. It felt like the tense, heavy pause before a storm breaks. I changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and completed the small, familiar rituals that had anchored my days since Robert's death. Routine had been my salvation back then, the thin, steady thread that held my life together when grief threatened to unravel everything. Now, that same routine felt like a quiet surrender, a passive acceptance of being pushed to the margins of my own life. The bed welcomed me with its familiar comfort, but sleep felt a million miles away. Downstairs, I could hear footsteps crossing the floor, a cabinet door closing, the low hum of the refrigerator door opening and shutting. Danielle and Michael were still awake, still planning their party, their grand celebration, in my house, with my resources, and entirely at my expense. Tomorrow would bring guests I hadn't invited, conversations I hadn't chosen, a hollow performance of family happiness, while my actual family treated me like an inconvenient landlord, and not even a respected one at that. The snow tapped gently against the window pane, and I listened to it like a slow, deliberate countdown. Christmas morning arrived not with carols, but with the sound of clattering pans and running water from the kitchen. I woke up naturally. No alarm needed. My internal clock had been set to an engineer's hours for 40 years. And old habits die hard. Through the bedroom window, I could see the yard was covered in a pristine blanket of white, completely unmarked except for a delicate line of rabbit tracks near the back fence. The hallway was unusually warm as I descended the stairs, heated by the flurry of activity below. Michael's voice drifted up, clear and animated as he talked to someone on the phone about timings and side dishes. His tone was more energetic than any I'd heard from him in months. Told them 7:00 sharp. Yes, Olivia, I know your potato salad needs to chill. Just bring it whenever. I reached the kitchen doorway and stopped dead in my tracks. The scene before me looked less like a casual Christmas dinner and more like the frantic preparations for a restaurant opening. Michael stood at the stove, the phone wedged between his shoulder and ear, somehow managing to simultaneously baste what looked like a 20-pound turkey and stir something in a large pot. The countertops groaned under the weight of an army of dishes I didn't even recognize. Crystal serving bowls, silver platters, and cloth napkins still in their original packaging were everywhere. "Good morning," I said into the chaos. He glanced over his shoulder, barely pausing in his orchestrated dance between the oven and the stovetop. "Morning. Coffee's fresh." The dining room table, visible through the archway, had been completely transformed. My simple, sturdy oak table was now draped in a cream-colored tablecloth I had never seen before. Gleaming place settings for 8 people shone under the chandelier. The good china, which I had carefully packed away in the attic after Robert's funeral, had apparently been retrieved and arranged without a single word to me. 8 people. Not 6 or 7, as Danielle mentioned. 8. "Michael, exactly how many people did you invite?" "Danielle handled the invitations, you should ask her," he said, not turning around this time. He was now focused on arranging what looked like 3 different kinds of bread in a large wicker basket. I counted the place settings again, just to be sure. 8 plates, 8 sets of silverware, 8 wine glasses. The centerpiece, an elaborate arrangement of pine boughs, crimson berries, and shimmering gold ribbon, must have cost more than I typically spend on groceries in an entire week. It would have been considerate to be told the exact number. "It's Christmas. Friends are coming over." His tone made it clear that, as far as he was concerned, the conversation was over. The refrigerator held even more surprises. 2 bottles of expensive champagne, a cheese platter covered in plastic wrap, and a tray of shrimp cocktail. The vegetables were all premium organic quality. Asparagus bundles tied neatly with twine, baby potatoes, and fresh ingredients for what was clearly homemade cranberry sauce. Danielle emerged from the living room, her hair still tousled from sleep, wearing the same clothes from the day before. She headed straight for the coffee pot, not even glancing in my direction. "Your father and I used to cook Christmas dinner together," I said quietly to her back. "It was always a simple meal, just for family." "Well, this isn't just family anymore," she retorted, pouring coffee into my favorite mug. The blue ceramic one Robert had given me for my 60th birthday. We thought you'd appreciate celebrating properly for a change. Properly? As if all my quiet, cherished Christmases with Robert had been somehow inadequate. Who exactly is coming? Danielle rattled off the names as if she were reading from a shopping list. Mark and Olivia Thompson, obviously. Karen from next door. Brian Davis from the firm. And his girlfriend, Jessica. Maybe Kevin from down the street if he doesn't have to work. She paused, thinking, oh, and Michael's sister might drive down from Cleveland. 8 potential guests had suddenly become 9. In my house, eating food purchased with my pension money. This seems like quite an undertaking for a casual Christmas dinner. Michael finally turned around, a wooden spoon in his hand, his face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. We just wanted to do something special, he said, gesturing vaguely around the room, to show people how grateful we are for everything. Grateful. The word felt hollow and meaningless, coming from someone who had been treating my home like his personal territory for 8 long months. That turkey alone must have cost $60. We wanted quality, Danielle said, her voice instantly defensive. You're the one who always taught me not to cut corners. It was true. I had taught her that. But in the context of her work, of building things to last, of taking pride in one's craftsmanship, not in the context of squandering someone else's money on impressive, superficial displays. The kitchen timer chimed, and Michael spun back to the oven, pulling out a tray of what appeared to be homemade dinner rolls. The smell, I had to admit, was magnificent. It was the scent of yeast and butter and warmth that belonged in a glossy magazine photo of a perfect family holiday. What time are people arriving? Around 2, Danielle answered. That gives us time to finish prepping and get cleaned up. 5 hours. 5 hours until my quiet home would be filled with virtual strangers. Until my living room would become a stage for Danielle and Michael's grand performance of successful hosting. I refilled my coffee mug, a different one, since Danielle had claimed my favorite and retreated to the living room. The Christmas tree seemed smaller somehow, dwarfed by a set of folding chairs that had been retrieved from the basement and arranged in a large semicircle. My reading chair, my cherished spot, had been unceremoniously pushed against the far wall to make room for the expanded seating arrangement. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched Michael move with a purposeful efficiency, while Danielle occasionally stirred a pot or opened a bottle of wine to let it breathe. They worked together like a well-oiled team, completely at ease in their shared project. When had they planned all of this? How many conversations had taken place during my absence? How many decisions had been made without even consulting the person who would ultimately be paying for it all? The house phone rang. Danielle answered it with an exaggerated, cheerful voice. Merry Christmas. Yes, everything's right on schedule. We can't wait to see you. I sat in my displaced chair, surrounded by the evidence of a celebration I hadn't chosen, drinking coffee from a mug that wasn't my favorite, watching my daughter and son-in-law transform my home into their personal vision of holiday entertainment. The day stretched out before me like a play I had never auditioned for, but was somehow expected to be the star of. Smile. Be gracious. Play the role of the generous matriarch, while my life savings funded their social ambitions. Outside, the snow continued its silent, steady fall, blanketing the world in a quiet, indifferent white. The afternoon had felt endless. I had retreated to my study after the shocking discovery in the kitchen, trying to read, trying to focus on anything other than the elaborate performance being orchestrated in my own home. But the sounds of their preparations filtered through every wall. The constant running of water, the clatter of dishes, Michael's voice directing some invisible production. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:00 p.m. I rose from my chair, straightened my sweater, and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass panel, I could make out two figures bundled up in heavy winter coats. My hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a second before I turned it. "Evelyn!" Olivia Thompson beamed at me, her arms laden with a covered dish and a bottle of wine wrapped in festive paper. Behind her, her husband Mark stamped the snow from his boots on the porch mat. "What a wonderful home. Thank you so much for inviting us." The word struck me like a physical blow. "Thank you for inviting us. To my own house." "Of course," I managed, forcing my face into what I hoped resembled a warm smile. "Please come in." I stepped aside to let them pass. Olivia bustled past me into the foyer, with Mark following, offering a quiet, "Good evening, Evelyn." They began to shrug off their coats, and I took them automatically, hanging them in the hall closet I had organized 30 years ago. As I arranged their heavy winter wear beside my own light jacket, I wondered at what point I had become a guest in my own home. "Oh, it smells absolutely divine in here," Olivia's voice carried from the living room. "Michael must be an amazing cook." I followed them in, watching as Olivia's eyes took in everything: the Christmas decorations, the family photos on the mantel, the carefully arranged furniture. Everything in the room bore the marks of my long life here. My books on the shelves, my reading glasses on the side table, the throw pillows Robert had loved, positioned exactly where I always left them. "Actually, Michael is doing the cooking," I said carefully. The doorbell chimed again. Karen Peterson, my neighbor, stood on the porch holding a plate of homemade cookies, her face bright with seasonal cheer. "Merry Christmas, dear," she chirped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, with the easy familiarity of a longtime neighbor. "I brought my sugar cookies. Danielle told me they were your favorites," Danielle said. When had my personal preferences become a topic of discussion in conversations I wasn't even a part of? "That's very thoughtful of you, Karen," I managed, taking the cookies and leading her toward the living room. The space was filling up quickly now with the sounds of cheerful voices and the rustle of winter coats. Brian Davis arrived last, carrying a case of beer and looking around the room with an appreciative expression. "Danielle, you've got a beautiful place here," he called out toward the kitchen, even though Danielle was nowhere in sight. "Thanks for having me." I moved through the room, offering everyone drinks from my own bar cart, knowing instinctively where the glasses were kept, which bottle of wine to uncork. Each action I took marked me as the owner of this home, and yet, every comment from the guests painted my daughter as the gracious host. "You've decorated so beautifully for Christmas," Olivia said, settling onto the sofa with her glass of wine. "These ornaments look like they must be family heirlooms." "I've always loved the holidays in this house," I replied, the simple truth slipping out before I could stop it. Mark looked up from examining the collection of family photos on the mantel. "So how long have you and Danielle lived here together?" The question hung in the air like a puff of smoke. I could feel every eye in the room turn toward me, waiting for an answer that would either maintain my daughter's elaborate fiction or expose it for the lie it was. "Well," I said finally, choosing my words with care, "it's complicated." Before anyone could press for clarification, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Danielle appeared in the living room doorway, freshly showered and dressed in the expensive silk shirt I'd watched her buy last month with money she didn't have. "Sorry I'm late getting down here." Her voice boomed with an artificial cheerfulness. "I hope Mom's been taking good care of you all." Mom, not Evelyn. Mom, a title that positioned me as the subordinate, the helper, the secondary figure in this gathering she had orchestrated. "Evelyn's been a wonderful host," Karen said warmly. Danielle's smile didn't waver, but I saw something flicker behind her eyes. "Well, she certainly knows her way around the house." The comment drew a few polite chuckles from the guests who couldn't possibly understand the cruel barb hidden within it. Of course I knew my way around the house. It was my house. Brian raised his beer bottle in Danielle's direction. "Great place you've got here, Danielle. It must be nice having so much space. It has its advantages, she replied, moving to claim the center of the room. Though it gets pretty expensive maintaining a place like this. Expensive to maintain. With whose money? Exactly? Olivia noticed my silence. Evelyn, you're awfully quiet. Are you feeling all right? Before I could formulate a response, Michael's voice cut through the conversation from the kitchen doorway. Dinner's ready. Everyone, please, come to the table. The announcement created a natural surge of movement. Guests rose, gathering their wine glasses, following Michael's gestures toward the dining room. I remained seated for a moment, watching my daughter shepherd people toward the elaborately set table, playing the part of the gracious host in my home, using my dishes. The dining room was already buzzing with appreciative comments about the formal setting, the beautiful centerpiece, the careful arrangement of 8 place settings around my solid oak table. I followed slowly, the last one in the procession, feeling like a stranger who had accidentally arrived at someone else's party. The dining room glowed with the warm light of candles. My oak table, which had hosted countless family meals over 23 years with Robert, was draped in that elaborate cream tablecloth I'd never seen before. The good china, stored safely in the attic since Robert's funeral, gleamed under the chandeliers he had picked out when we first bought the house. Guests milled around the table, wine glasses in hand, their voices bright with holiday cheer. Olivia was admiring the centerpiece, while Brian complimented the formal setting. Everyone moved with that pleasant sense of anticipation for a special meal, completely unaware that they were witnessing the systematic erasure of my authority in my own home. I approached my usual chair at the head of the table, the seat I had occupied for nearly 3 decades. The place from which I had carved every Christmas turkey and birthday cake, where I had helped Danielle with her homework, and discussed my day with Robert. My hand reached out automatically for its familiar position. Danielle stepped directly into my path. Stop. The single word cut through the dinner party chatter like a shard of ice. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every head in the room turned toward us. You're not invited to this dinner table, freeloader. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear the soft tapping of snow against the window panes. Brian's beer bottle stopped halfway to his lips. Olivia's hand froze on the stem of her wine glass. Karen's mouth opened into a small, shocked circle. What did you just say? My voice came out much quieter than I had intended, barely above a whisper. You heard me. Danielle's posture radiated a chilling confidence, as if she were feeding off the audience of shocked faces. We invited our real guests tonight. Oh my. Olivia's whispered words were barely audible in the crushing silence. I stood frozen, my hand still extended toward my own chair, while my 35-year-old daughter blocked my path like a bouncer at some exclusive club. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in on me, as every eye focused on this moment of profound public humiliation. Maybe we should... Karen started, her voice trailing off uncertainly. No, stay. Danielle's interruption was sharp and commanding. She needs to hear this. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still in his hands, watching the scene unfold. When our eyes met, he gave an almost imperceptible nod, a silent gesture of support for his wife's public degradation of her own mother. The colored lights from the Christmas tree in the living room cast shifting shadows through the archway, red and green and gold, dancing across faces frozen in disbelief. The formal table setting, my china, my silverware, my dining room, it had all become a stage for a brutal display of family warfare. Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. Danielle, she's your mother. A mother who doesn't deserve any respect. Danielle's voice rose, gaining strength from the shocked attention. All day long, she just sits around, does nothing, and acts like she owns the place. Acts like I own the place, because I do own the place. Brian shifted in his chair, his eyes darting toward the front door, as if he were calculating the quickest escape route. Maybe we should leave. Don't leave because of her. Danielle waved dismissively in my direction, treating me like an unwelcome intruder who had crashed her party. This is our dinner party. Our dinner party. In my house. With my dishes. Purchased with my pension money. Olivia reached a hand toward Danielle's arm. Her maternal instincts clearly kicking in. Danielle, please, maybe we shouldn't. It's Christmas. No. Her response was sharp enough to make Olivia flinch. She needs to know her place. All day long she sits around. Does nothing. Does nothing. While I volunteer at the library, maintain this house, pay all the bills, and subsidize their entire lifestyle with my retirement savings. The candles flickered in their crystal holders, Robert's candles. From Robert's holders. On Robert's table, he would have been horrified by this public spectacle, this gross violation of everything he had ever taught Danielle about respect and family. Danielle? Karen's voice carried the unmistakable weight of motherly disappointment. This is making everyone very uncomfortable. She's made he uncomfortable for months. Danielle's gestures became more animated as she fed off the tension in the room. Living here like she owns the place. Living here like I own the place. The irony was so staggering, so complete. It almost made me want to laugh. Almost. The silence stretched between us again, thick with shock and secondhand embarrassment. Around the table, my guests know. Danielle's guests sat frozen, trapped witnesses to a family meltdown they could never have expected when they accepted an invitation to Christmas dinner. Michael moved slightly in the doorway, still watching, still silent, still endorsing his wife's performance with his passive presence. I remained standing beside my displaced chair. Every eye in the room was focused on me, waiting for my response. The moment hung in the air like a suspended breath, pregnant with possibility. The only sound was the snow continuing to tap against the windows and the soft hiss of the candles burning down. The silence stretched on until it became almost unbearable. I could feel 8 pairs of eyes fixed on me, waiting for my reaction to my daughter's public, vicious humiliation. Danielle stood beside my chair like a guard, her chest puffed out with an artificial authority, feeding off the shocked attention of her captive audience. Olivia reached across the table toward Danielle, her voice gentle but firm. Danielle, please, maybe we shouldn't. It's Christmas. She jerked her arm away from Olivia's touch. No. She needs to know her place. All day long, she sits around and does nothing. Mark pushed his chair back slightly from the table, his diplomatic instincts kicking in. Danielle, she is your mother. A mother who doesn't deserve any respect. Danielle's voice carried across the dining room, bouncing off walls that had heard 40 years of family conversations, but never anything like this. Living here like she owns the place. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her kind, motherly features creased with concern. This is making everyone uncomfortable. She's made me uncomfortable for months. Danielle spun to face the guests, treating them like a jury she desperately needed to convince. Every day I come home from looking for work, and there she is, sitting in my living room, reading my books, watching my television. My living room, my books, my television. Each possessive pronoun felt like a physical blow. Brian set down his beer bottle with deliberate care, the small sound echoing in the tense silence. Maybe we should all just leave. Don't leave because of her. Danielle's voice cracked with a note of desperation, as if she could sense that her performance wasn't having the desired effect on her audience. This is our dinner party, our house, our life. But Olivia wasn't buying it. Her eyes moved from Danielle to me, taking in my careful posture, my obvious familiarity with the space, the way I naturally knew where everything in this house belonged. Evelyn, she said quietly, but with a new edge to her voice. Whose house is this? The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Danielle's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. We all live here together. It's complicated. No, Olivia said, her voice gaining strength. It's not complicated. Whose name is on the deed? That doesn't matter, Danielle stammered, her confident facade finally beginning to crumble. Mark stood up slowly, his height giving him an immediate sense of authority in the suddenly charged room. Danielle, you just called your mother a freeloader in what appears to be her own home at Christmas dinner. You don't understand. Danielle's voice rose to almost a shout. She acts like some generous matriarch, but she controls everything. Every penny, every decision, every single moment of our lives. Controls everything. While she and Michael spent my money on designer clothes and elaborate dinner parties, Karen's voice cut through Danielle's mounting hysteria. How long have you two been living here? We're not. Danielle looked wildly between her guests, realizing with dawning horror that her carefully constructed narrative was collapsing around her. 8 months, Brian repeated slowly. Rent-free? Michael finally spoke from the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper. We're just getting back on our feet. On whose feet? Olivia's question was surgical in its precision. Who pays the mortgage on this house? The utilities? The food for this dinner? The questions came like a volley of arrows, each one finding its mark. Danielle's face cycled through a series of emotions. Anger, embarrassment, desperation, and finally, pure rage. She looked around the table at faces that had started the evening as friendly acquaintances and were now filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. You all don't get it, she exploded. It's not that simple. Life is complicated. What's complicated, Mark said quietly, is disrespecting your mother in her own home in front of guests she didn't even invite. Danielle's performance was unraveling thread by thread. The authority she had tried to project through sheer volume and aggression was being systematically demolished by simple questions and quiet observations. She's controlling. She makes us feel like children. You're acting like children, Karen said, her grandmotherly voice carrying the weight of decades of watching family dynamics play out. Grown adults are supposed to pay their own way. The words seemed to hit Danielle like physical blows. Her face contorted with fury, the mask of the successful host now completely abandoned. Don't you dare lecture me. You don't know what it's like. I know what respect looks like, Olivia said firmly. And this isn't it. Danielle whirled toward me, her finger pointed at me like a weapon. Look at her. Just standing there acting like the victim. I remained perfectly still, letting her words hang in the tense air, letting the guests see for themselves exactly who was creating this scene, who was single-handedly destroying Christmas dinner with baseless accusations and unbridled rage. The contrast was stark. Danielle's mounting hysteria against my controlled silence, her desperate justifications against my dignified stillness. The dining room had become a courtroom, and the jury was clearly reaching its verdict. The dining room held its breath. Danielle stood triumphant beside my chair, chest heaving from her emotional performance, while 8 pairs of eyes waited for my response to her accusations. She had painted me as the villain, the controlling matriarch, the burdensome freeloader in her own twisted narrative. I turned away from her completely. I spoke directly to the guests, my voice carrying the measured precision of 4 decades spent in engineering. Freeloader. Danielle, why don't you remind our guests who pays the mortgage on this house? That's not important. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real hint that her confidence was entirely manufactured. Who bought the food for tonight's dinner? I continued, still addressing Olivia, Mark, Karen, and Brian, as if my own daughter wasn't worth acknowledging. Who pays the electricity that's keeping these lights on? The gas that's heating this room? The water in those wine glasses? Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Olivia's eyes moved from Danielle to me, the pieces of a very ugly puzzle beginning to click into place. You're just embarrassing yourself. Danielle's interruption sounded desperate now, no longer commanding. I gestured toward her feet. Those $300 sneakers you're wearing, are those my fault too? Danielle's face flushed a brilliant crimson. Stop it. The designer jeans, the expensive watch. My voice remained level, factual. 8 months of groceries, utilities, insurance premiums. Should I go get the receipts? You don't understand. Danielle spun back toward the guests, seeking allies who were clearly no longer listening to her. She controls everything. Olivia set down her wine glass with deliberate care. Danielle, whose name is on the deed to this house? The question landed like a physical blow. Danielle's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no sound came out. This is her house, Karen said quietly, the full realization dawning in her voice. Isn't it, Evelyn? Brian looked around the dining room with a new, dawning understanding. The family photos on the walls, all showing me and Robert through decades of marriage, the careful organization of the room, the settled, comfortable feeling of long habitation. Everything pointed to one simple truth. How long have you been living here? Mark's question was surgical in its simplicity. 8 months, I answered, when Danielle remained silent, rent-free. They were supposed to stay for a couple of weeks, just until they got back on their feet. Michael made a small, strangled sound from the kitchen doorway, somewhere between a gasp and a groan. A couple of weeks, Olivia repeated slowly. 8 months ago. The math was simple enough for everyone to do. The guests exchanged glances. The kind of silent communication that happens between married couples who have spent decades reading each other's expressions. Danielle. Karen's voice was heavy with a mother's disappointment. You called your mother a freeloader in her own home. You don't understand the situation. Danielle's voice rose again, but it sounded hollow now, echoing in a room that had decisively turned against her. I think I understand perfectly, Brian said quietly. He looked at me with something approaching awe. You've been supporting them for 8 months. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not one of shocked confusion, but of dawning comprehension. The guests now saw Danielle's expensive clothes with new eyes, understood the elaborate dinner preparations in a completely new context, and recognized the careful, proprietary way I moved through my own space. And those credit card bills you left on the kitchen counter? I continued, still speaking to the guests rather than my daughter. $12,000 in debt. All while living in my house, eating my food, and using my utilities. Danielle's face had gone pale, the color draining away as her carefully constructed narrative collapsed. Sentence by sentence. She makes us feel like children. Danielle tried one last, desperate justification. You're acting like children, Olivia said firmly. Grown adults should pay their own way. The words hit Danielle with the force of a physical blow. She staggered back slightly, looking around the table at faces that had started the evening friendly and were now filled with undisguised disgust. Mark stood up slowly, his height giving him an air of authority in the suddenly changed room. I think we've all heard enough. The dining room that had begun the evening as a stage for Danielle's performance of successful hosting had become a courtroom, and the jury had reached its verdict. Danielle looked wildly between her guests, seeking a sliver of support that was no longer there, finally understanding that her humiliation was now complete and very, very public. This isn't over, she whispered, but the words carried no weight in a room that had already dismissed her. Danielle's whispered threat hung in the air for exactly 3 heartbeats before she completely exploded. Her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor as she shot to her feet, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Her fists slammed down onto the oak table, making the dishes jump and the wine glasses tremble. Enough! The word erupted from her with such force that Karen flinched backward. Olivia's hand flew to her chest. Brian half rose from his seat, his protective instincts kicking in. Go to your room, right now. The command was clearly meant to humiliate me in front of the guests, to reassert her dominance through volume and aggression. Danielle pointed a trembling finger toward the staircase like a parent disciplining a disobedient child. I remained perfectly still. The contrast in the candlelit dining room was stark. Danielle's face was red and contorted with rage, gesturing wildly, while I stood calm and unmoved beside the chair she had blocked me from. The guests sat frozen, witnessing something that had gone far beyond a simple family disagreement and into the realm of a public breakdown. Mark cleared his throat. Danielle, maybe you should. Danielle whirled to face him, her eyes wild. You don't understand. I'm the one in charge here. This is my house. But the words sounded hollow now, desperate and unbelievable. Everyone in the room knew the truth. Danielle. Olivia's voice was soft, laced with concern. Please, just sit down. I will not sit down in my own dining room. She began pacing behind the chairs like a caged animal, her hands clenched into tight fists. She just sits there acting all innocent, but she controls every penny, every decision, every single moment of our lives. Michael shifted slightly in the kitchen doorway, clearly torn between loyalty to his wife and sheer horror at her public meltdown. She needs to learn some respect. Danielle's voice cracked on the last word. Go upstairs, now. The silence that followed was profound. 8 people holding their breath, waiting to see how this terrifying moment would resolve. I waited until the echo of her shouting had faded completely before I spoke. You have until morning to move out. My voice was quiet, measured, and final. There was no anger, no emotion, just a simple statement of fact. The words hit Danielle like a physical blow. Her mouth fell open. The frantic pacing stopped. What? The question came out strangled, disbelieving. We're not going anywhere. You have until morning. You can't make us leave. I turned to face her directly for the first time since her outburst began. This is my house. The simplicity of the statement was devastating. There were no arguments, no justifications, no negotiations, just the plain, unassailable truth. Danielle's face cycled through a storm of emotions. Shock, rage, disbelief, and finally, sheer panic. You can't! We don't have anywhere to go. It's Christmas. Oh, you should have thought of that before you called me a freeloader at my own dinner table. The guests sat transfixed, watching the complete and utter destruction of Danielle's world in real time. Brian reached for his wife's hand under the table. Olivia covered her mouth with her fingers, her eyes welling up with tears. Please? Danielle's voice broke completely. Mom, please. We can talk about this. But I was already moving toward the staircase, my decision made and communicated. The dining room that had been a battlefield just minutes earlier now felt like a courtroom after the sentencing. Until morning, I repeated without looking back. Behind me, the silence stretched like a held breath, broken only by the soft sound of my footsteps on the stairs. And someone, maybe it was Michael, beginning to cry. The Christmas dinner that Danielle had orchestrated to prove her authority had become her complete and final undoing. And it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. The staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed away from the wreckage of what was supposed to be Christmas dinner. Each step took me further from Danielle's breakdown and closer to the sanctuary of my bedroom. Behind me, the dining room had erupted into hushed, frantic conversation, voices overlapping as the guests tried to process what they had just witnessed. My bedroom door closed with a soft click, sealing me away from the chaos below. I stood for a moment with my back against the door, listening to the muffled sounds filtering up through the floorboards. Danielle's voice, high and panicked. Michael crying, the scrape of chairs as people began to move. I removed my dinner jacket, hanging it carefully in the closet beside the suits I had worn to Robert's funeral, to Danielle's graduation, to retirement parties and birthday celebrations. The simple ritual of putting away formal clothes felt symbolic, as if I were shedding the costume for a performance I had never wanted to be a part of. The reading chair by the window welcomed me like an old friend. From my vantage point, I could see the driveway, the street, the normal Christmas lights twinkling in my neighbor's windows. The world outside was continuing its holiday celebration, completely oblivious to the family drama that had just imploded in my dining room. Car doors slammed in the driveway. Engines started. One by one, the guests were fleeing the disaster Danielle had created. I watched as the headlights of Brian's car swept across the snow-covered lawn as it backed out, followed swiftly by Mark and Olivia's sedan. Karen's porch light flickered on across the street as she hurried home, probably eager to distance herself from the evening's ugliness. The house grew quieter as the exodus continued. Downstairs, voices rose and fell. Danielle and Michael were now having what sounded like a furious argument. Something crashed, maybe a plate being slammed down onto the counter. Then Michael's voice again, pleading, reasoning, desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage. 35 years. I'd waited 35 years for her to finally act like an adult. 35 years of watching her take shortcuts, make excuses, and expect everyone else to clean up her messes. Robert had always believed she would eventually mature, that she would find her way. Give her time, Evelyn, he'd always said. She'll figure it out. But time had finally run out. 8 months of supporting her financially while she treated me like an intruder in my own home. 8 months of watching her spend money she didn't have while I clipped coupons to make ends meet. 8 months of being treated like the help in my own house. The snow continued to fall outside, steady and silent. The Millers' inflatable snowman still waved its mechanical greeting from their front yard, completely oblivious to human drama. Christmas would continue tomorrow, regardless of family feuds or eviction ultimatums. Around 9 o'clock, the house finally fell silent. No more arguing, no more crying, no more frantic sounds of activity. Either Danielle and Michael had completely exhausted themselves, or they had retreated to the guest room to plan their next move. I settled deeper into my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The familiar, quiet comfort of my own space, my own thoughts, my own decisions, without any interference or judgment. Tomorrow would undoubtedly bring consequences. Danielle would test my ultimatum, probably believing I didn't have the resolve to follow through. She had learned tonight that her public humiliation tactics had backfired spectacularly. But desperation might drive her to try other approaches. Let her try. I had spent 40 years of my life solving complex engineering problems, analyzing systems, and finding solutions. Danielle had become a problem with a very clear, very simple solution. Removal. The bedroom clock ticked past 10. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into the deep quiet of Christmas night. Porch lights had dimmed, and windows glowed softly with the lights of Christmas trees and the warmth of family. Normal families, finishing their normal celebrations. I would have a normal Christmas again too, starting tomorrow. The old house creaked softly around me as it settled into the winter silence. Whatever sounds came from downstairs now were too faint to reach my sanctuary. For the first time in 8 long months, I felt like I was truly home. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the silence. No running water from their bathroom. No footsteps pacing overhead. None of the usual sounds of movement that had become the unwanted soundtrack to 8 months of cohabitation. The digital clock beside my bed read 10:00 a.m. The deadline had passed 2 hours ago. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing clothes that conveyed authority. Pressed slacks, a collared shirt, the leather belt Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. Every action felt ceremonial, as if I were preparing for a conclusion that had been inevitable since Danielle's first month of making excuses instead of making progress. The staircase creaked under my weight as I descended into the aftermath of last night's disaster. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the wreckage of what was supposed to be Christmas dinner. Wine glasses sat abandoned on every surface, some still containing the dregs of expensive wine purchased with my pension money. Plates with congealed gravy and cold, untouched turkey dotted the dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. The good china, Robert's china, looked violated somehow, stained with the residue of family warfare. Danielle's leather jacket was slung over the back of my reading chair, the $200 price tag still etched in my memory from the day I'd watched her buy it. Michael's expensive cosmetics were scattered across the upstairs bathroom counter, his face creams and serums claiming territory like a small hostile invasion. I made coffee in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of last night's turkey, listening intently for any sounds from the guest bedroom. Nothing. They were sleeping in, supremely confident in their assumption that the old woman had been bluffing. 35 years of watching me bend, compromise, and accommodate had taught them that I was all bark and no bite. This morning felt different than yesterday's tense anticipation. There was no anxiety, no second guessing. The decision had crystallized during the long, quiet night into something clean and final. They had been given their chance to leave with a shred of dignity. They had chosen defiance instead. I settled at the kitchen table with my coffee, positioning myself so I had a clear view of the hallway that led to their bedroom. The house felt larger somehow, as if removing the sheer weight of their presence had opened up space I had forgotten even existed. Through the window, I could see the Millers across the street, finally hanging the Christmas lights they'd apparently forgotten to put up before the holiday. Normal people, having normal problems. Not hosting adult children who called them freeloaders in their own homes. The coffee was good. The expensive dark roast blend Danielle had insisted on buying. Another small irony in a situation that was full of them. I'll drink the rest of it after they're gone, I thought. A small, private victory toast with ingredients purchased with my generosity, and then thrown back in my face. The clock hands moved with a steady, mechanical precision toward 11. Still no sounds from upstairs. Still no acknowledgement that they had missed the deadline. Still no signs of packing or preparation. Their silence was its own form of communication. A high-stakes bet that I lacked the resolve to follow through on my ultimatum. They were about to learn just how expensive that bet would prove to be. At exactly 11:00 a.m., floorboards creaked overhead. I heard the sound of feet hitting the floor, a muffled conversation, the toilet flushing. Finally, they were awake, probably discussing their strategy for managing the aftermath of last night's explosion. I remained seated with my coffee, waiting, as patient as I had been for 8 long months. But with an entirely different purpose now. Danielle appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a pair of silk pajamas Michael had given her for her birthday. $70 pajamas, I remembered the receipt. Her hair was disheveled, but her posture carried the casual confidence of someone who believed the storm had passed. "Morning, Mom," she said, as she padded into the kitchen, her bare feet slapping against the tiles I had installed myself 15 years ago. "Coffee smells good." I watched her pour herself a cup, using the mug Robert had painted in his ceramics class, the one with "World's Best Husband" written in his careful script. Another small, casual violation in a long series of them. "Sleep well?" I asked eventually. She leaned against the counter, affecting the casual pose of someone who belonged there. "You know, last night got pretty heated. You know how holidays can be. Everyone's stressed. Emotions are running high." Her dismissal of the events was practiced and polished, reducing the previous evening's public humiliation to nothing more than holiday stress and family tensions. Nothing more serious than a disagreement over football teams or dinner timing. "Pretty heated," I repeated, my voice flat. "Exactly. But it's Christmas morning. Well, the day after Christmas. She gestured with her mug toward the living room, where wrapping paper from gifts they had bought with my money still littered the floor. Time to move past it. You know, family's family, family's family. The very phrase that had been used to cover 8 months of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. So, everything's fine now? I asked. Of course it's fine. Danielle settled into the chair across from me, perfectly comfortable in her assumption that yesterday's consequences had simply evaporated with the morning light. We had a fight. It happens to everyone. Everything's fine now. I took a slow sip of my coffee, studying her face over the rim of my mug. She was confident, relaxed, already planning how to smooth over the damage with the friends who had witnessed her meltdown. The art of making problems disappear through sheer charm and selective memory. Fine will be when you've moved out. The words dropped into the quiet kitchen like stones into a still pond. Danielle's confident expression flickered for just a moment before reassembling itself. Mom, come on. You can't be serious about that deadline nonsense. I'm completely serious, she laughed, a sound that was forced and hollow. It's been what? 14 hours? You expect us to just pack up our entire lives and find a new place overnight? I expected you to start packing last night. And where exactly are we supposed to go? It's the day after Christmas. Nothing's open. There's nowhere to look for apartments. Her tone shifted, becoming reasonable, practical. You have to be realistic here. I stood, carried my empty mug to the sink, and turned to face her. You had 8 months to make other arrangements. We've been trying. You know we've been looking. The lie came smoothly, practiced. The job market is tight. Rental prices are insane. We just need more time. You've had your time. Danielle's carefully constructed facade finally began to crack around the edges. So what are you going to do if we don't leave? What's your big plan, huh? I reached for the old phone that was hanging on the kitchen wall, in the same spot where it had hung for 20 years. Danielle's eyes followed my movement, her confident posture shifting almost imperceptibly. You'll see. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just make us leave. Her voice rose, the reasonable mask slipping away to reveal the raw panic underneath. We're family. My hand closed around the cool plastic of the phone receiver. Danielle stared at me, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes, as she finally began to understand that her practiced manipulations were no longer working, that the old, reliable patterns of guilt and obligation had been permanently broken. Stop, she said quietly. Just stop and think about this. But I had been thinking about it for 8 excruciating months. I had been thinking about it all night long. The time for thinking was over. The police arrived in exactly 23 minutes, a much faster response time than I had expected for a civil matter. 2 officers stood on my front porch. One younger with close-cropped hair, the other older with the patient, weary demeanor of someone who had handled domestic disputes for decades. Ma'am, we received a call about a property dispute, the older officer said, his notepad at the ready. He was professional, but not unfriendly. Yes, officer. I need assistance in removing unauthorized occupants from my home. I held out the folder I had prepared. The deed, mortgage statements, utility bills, all in my name. These individuals have been living here without a lease or rental agreement, and they have refused to leave my property when asked. Danielle appeared behind me in the hallway, still in those expensive silk pajamas, her face pale with disbelief. Officer, this is crazy. This is my mother. We just had a family argument. The younger officer began to examine my documentation, while his partner listened patiently to Danielle's protests. Property ownership wasn't complicated. Either your name was on the papers, or it wasn't. Ma'am, are you the sole owner of this property? The older officer asked me. Yes. My late husband and I purchased it in 1987. It's been fully paid off for 12 years. And these individuals have been residing here without your permission? Initially with my permission. As temporary guests. That arrangement ended last night. I asked them to leave by this morning. They refused. The officers exchanged a quick, knowing glance, the kind of silent, professional communication that comes from years of dealing with family drama that spills over legal lines. Ma'am. The older officer addressed Danielle directly. You need to gather your belongings and leave the premises. This is insane. She can't just kick us out. We've been living here for 8 months. The property owner has the right to remove unauthorized occupants. The officer stated calmly. You have no lease agreement or rental contract establishing tenancy rights. Michael appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a bathrobe that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. His face was swollen from crying, his makeup smeared from last night's disaster. How long do we have? He asked quietly. I'd recommend you gather your essential items now, the older officer replied. You can arrange to retrieve your remaining belongings at a later time if necessary. The next hour played out with a cold mechanical efficiency. Danielle alternated between furious protests and desperate bargaining. But legal authority wasn't something she could charm or manipulate. The officers supervised as boxes and suitcases emerged from the guest bedroom. Michael gathered his cosmetics from the bathroom. 8 months of their gradual invasion was methodically reversed in 60 minutes. Neighbors began to emerge onto their porches and peer through their windows, their suburban curiosity drawn by the sight of official vehicles and public drama. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down walked her dog past my driveway twice, clearly gathering intelligence for the neighborhood network. This isn't over, Danielle hissed as she loaded the last box into their car. You think you've won something here. But this isn't over. The threat hung in the cold winter air like a visible breath. But it carried no weight. Not in the presence of police officers and legal documentation. Have a safe trip, dear. Their car backed out of my driveway for the last time, Danielle gunning the engine in a final, impotent gesture of rage. The officers completed their paperwork, advised me about the process for obtaining a restraining order if the harassment continued, and departed with a professional courtesy that treated me as exactly what I was, a property owner exercising her legitimate rights. The house settled into a deep silence as their car disappeared around the corner. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the debris of Christmas dinner, but finally free of the heavy weight that had been pressing down on my life for 8 long months. On the coffee table, Danielle's expensive watch sat forgotten, an item probably worth more than most people's weekly salary. I picked it up, feeling its substantial weight in my hand, then walked to the front door and set it on the porch railing. Let her come back for it if she wanted it badly enough. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that were mine again, into rooms that belonged to me again, across floors where I could walk without having to justify my very presence. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Tomorrow, I would start cleaning up the damage. But tonight, I would simply enjoy being home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.